The current scarcity of petroleum products across the globe continues to linger and could for several months and in fact worsen if new sanctions proposed by the European Union regarding Russia's oil and gas supplies are agreed to. But how will the bloc that imports some 3.5 million barrels of Russian oil and oil products every day and depends on the country for a large portion of its gas supplies find alternatives? For some time now, African oil and gas producers have been suggested as the alternative, but for now, that is not panning out as thought. The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries could also provide a solution, but it seems its hands are tied. With concerns over stalled global growth and high inflation, many have been urging the oil cartel to increase output. Some OPEC members, unfortunately, have been struggling to meet their production quota. According to a Bloomberg poll, while Iraq witnessed a significant increase in output, nations like Libya and Nigeria saw production decline due to operational problems and reduced investment. Even the group's head, Saudi Arabia, didn't go as far as it agreed for its quota. Another issue piling on the pressure are the lockdown measures in China's Beijing and Shanghai cities. This has cut demand from the available supply that could have pushed more production output. This reality, coupled with the growing divestment of some oil majors in sub-Saharan Africa, has affected the global supply chain and raised the cost of refined petroleum products. And people around the world are bearing the cost. Today, we look at how the global oil supply is stagnant, even as the disruption lingers. This is Business Edge. I'm Tolulokwe Adeleru Balogun. And joining me today is Desmond Abuefo. He's energy expert and director of Decitone Energy. Desmond, welcome back to Business Edge. Thank you once again for joining me.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have me again on your station. Thank you so much.
All right, so let's start with a bit of background, particularly in how the Russia-Ukraine crisis has affected the global economy. So in 2021, either the Russian Federation or Ukraine, or even both, ranked among the top 3 global exporters of wheat, maize, rapeseed, sunflower seeds, and sunflower oil, while the Russian Federation also stood as the world's top exporter of nitrogen fertilizers, the second leading supplier of potassium fertilizers, and the third largest exporter of phosphorus fertilizers. And of course, there's the oil and gas supplies as well. With the news of the invasion, did you envision this amount of upheaval for the international markets and the consequences that African countries have seen now?
Well, thank you very much. I think the changes are a bit expected. And of course, it comes with its own issues of sometimes being also unprecedented. We've seen the global issues in the industry, and we've also seen the impact to which the issues has played out at the global scene. And of course, trickling down to the African space, where we see a lot of, key signature projects from the Dangote refinery coming up soon on stream. And also, we just witnessed the fertilizer plant just being commissioned a few months, I think last month or so. And that has also showcased that, yes, there are some strides in the industry vis-a-vis the issues we see coming from the international scene, where the Ukraine and Russian crisis has also loomed. And of course, that has also impacted what we see now as perhaps an artificial hike in oil price. But yes, they are also unexpected. And of course, the industry has also been known for such kind of, shocks and troughs, as we see in a very recent time.
All right. So when we now fast forward, especially to yesterday and news coming out that there would be a second round of sanctions targeting Russia's very lucrative oil and gas industry, what do you think the further consequences would be for African economies in particular if we see supplies further tightening in the coming weeks, which is possible to happen, but there, of course, is the issue of how many of the EU bloc members will vote for this?
Right. Taking the issue one at a time, we've seen that the issues will definitely be, come with a price within the African energy space. I think we should perhaps just take a step back to understand, put it in context and try to understand what the pluses and the negatives will come to be On the global scene, we've seen that the oil prices, of course, has increased. And I like the comment from the chief economics of Renaissance Capital, where he stated that, of course, we'll see a hike in food prices. Of course, untold inflation has hit the economy. And of course, the third part of the way might be central banks and even the lending institutions even increasing the rates, which will also spell a possible hard time for the economies to have access to, to loans to finance projects. And on the second focus on that would be the impact of food supply. And the studies has had it that Russia and Ukraine supplies about 30% of the global wheat globally, and in fact, 15 alone come from Ukraine. And when you look at the African market itself, the concept of the Maghreb countries, which comprise of Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco, I think Libya, and Algeria, yes, they rely heavily on wheat supply. So of course, we can see that that upheave generally will impact their food production. Kenya, of course, is also part of the mix. They often are being affected by the tea production because Russia is also among the top 5 countries that, of course, helps to access tea from Kenya, also helping to boost their foreign earnings. So yes, we've seen the impact on oil, we've seen the impact on food supplies, and of course, on the social scene, we've seen the impact on education because most of the Ukrainian students come from Nigeria and Morocco, which make up about 25% of the total student mix in Ukraine. So we see that this upheave will also impact these 3 key sectors of the economy.
All right, so let's focus a little bit on oil prices. Right now, they're around that $106 a barrel. But what the EU is considering, as I said earlier, is a second package of sanctions. And they need the 27 members of the bloc to unanimously agree to ban imports from Russia. And of course, that's meant to be in a processed manner. But Hungary and Slovakia have said that they can't take part in any of these sanctions. And that's important for a question coming later. And they've asked for a transition period of 2 to 3 years before they can implement the ban. But where I'm going with this is that analysts are saying that if it passes, oil could reach about $185 per barrel in the coming week. Where do you think the prices will land if the EU is successful in passing this embargo?
Of course, thank you very much, Tolupe. Obviously, we'll see the price plummeting above its current level right now, to be very honest. And of course, the analysts are also right in the analysis and the projections that the prices could go that high. But in my own impression, and I think, from studies that we've seen in the past, the prices wouldn't go as much as $185 a barrel, to be honest. The reason is that, you see, the market of the oil is driven by the forces of demand and supply. And we've seen the highest point where the industry has picked up high rates per barrel to be about 160, 150. That's around 2013 or so. But right now, we see that steep coming down a bit now to about 106, as you rightly alluded. So yes, if the members do their bit well, and of course, looking at the issues around the space, we will see, of course, a hike, but we don't expect these issues to be longer than necessary, to be honest.
So this disruption in energy supplies from the crisis has had African oil and gas producers being pushed forward as an alternative, especially with some of the pipeline conversations that have been happening in a number of countries for a number of years. But outside of the scarcity experience in several countries as a result of the increase, that hasn't actually really borne any fruit in the past several weeks. Why is it that Africa has not really been positioned to take advantage, unfortunately, of this current situation beyond maybe an enjoyment of what is now some high oil prices on the international market?
Thank you. I think this question it's well on the front burners of the policymakers and of course even the ministries of petroleum and oil and gas in Africa. Very clearly, Africa are faced with a lot of challenges in terms of infrastructure. We've seen that, of course, for you to increase the production, you have to have the sustainable infrastructure to drive that plan. And on the broader scene, we've seen an access to sustainable investments and perception in the industry really coming to be almost on a standstill. And that poses a big challenge even for financing institutions to be able to access fundings because of the perceived investment risk. And also on the other side of that, we've seen even a decline in capital expenditures. I was having to talk to my team about how the numbers are coming down drastically. We've seen the planned investment of about $90 billion in 2020. And by the end of 2021, we saw that dropped about $62 or $63 billion. So, I mean, that 35% drop in investment across the African space spells a doom. It spells also a disaster. But of course, that also comes with its own promises, because right now we're trying to work towards the accelerated energy transition period where investments hit now towards the low carbon energy systems. And of course, currently we agree the African space also lags in that global pace. We've also seen that, as we begin to work towards that transition of net zero emissions, which I think is such a tall target in the next few years, that may take a couple of 10, 15, 20 years when we have all our ducks in a row. This has been the issue that has come up. So emissions, targets, compliance are a bigger issue. Access to investment from investors, because most of the huge plays in African space, so the deep water offshore, we've seen the Bonga Southwest and the Zabazaba Etam projects being stalled. And this, again, that's also perception about what the industry would look like in the next few years. But right now, we've seen an improvement in the prices. But I mean, we are just being positive to see that would not be the issue from now to the foreseeable future.
All right. So Desmond, we've seen a lot of focus on African oil and gas producers and some of their capacity issues, but it's not just in the continent that capacity issues are being discussed. OPEC is meeting later today. We're going to touch base on how things are playing out with OPEC, particularly as this disruption lingers, and what we expect the organization to decide in the coming hours. So please just hold on. When the conversation continues, even as we see the global oil supply is fluctuating, and of course the disruption has lingered, the Organization for Petroleum Exporting Countries is meeting today, and they are going to discuss the potential of increasing production quotas across board. Could that be something that happens, and could it be something that eases some of the tension that's being experienced around the world? The conversation will continue after this. And still with me is Desmond Aboifo. He's an energy expert and the director of Decitone Energy. Now, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries added just 10,000 barrels a day in April, compared with a scheduled 274,000 a day, pumping an average of 28.7 million barrels a day. The group has struggled for many months to revive oil supplies halted during the COVID-19 pandemic, but members have remained plagued by capacity constraints. While Iraq made a substantial boost, countries such as Libya and Nigeria saw their production fall amid operational disruptions and diminished investment. And even, of course, the group leader, Saudi Arabia, did not hike as much as it was permitted by its agreed quotas. Now, beyond the issues countries like Nigeria, Libya, and Iraq are having, the Russia-Ukraine war, as well as a component of this conversation, why is OPEC struggling to meet its overall quota? So Desmond, let me come back to you. Why is OPEC having this struggle as we're seeing it now, beyond the war in Libya, beyond divestment and operational issues in Nigeria, and what's happening in Iraq as well? Why the struggle?
Great, thank you, Tupe. I think the key rationale for OPEC to first of all, even place targets for producing countries are, of course, so that can create some form of stability in the markets, and also, of course, keep prices at very, very sustainable levels. Now, the question of why OPEC is struggling to keep the prices at, of course, targets as planned comes with a lot of issues. So clearly, I think the responses will be addressed looking at the context around the country that operates. You clearly mentioned that Iraq, of course, was able to pick that up, of course, to about 170,000 barrels a day. And Iraq, from studies and research data, they do about 4 million barrels sustainable productions. And Libya and Nigeria also saw their production even drop amid operational disruptions and even investment slumps, even as reported by Bloomberg. The core reason why they struggle to keep these targets in place are due to the dynamics in the industry. Countries, of course, make quite a lot of returns from oil production, which turns to revenues as a country. And if we see the dynamics clearly, Saudi Arabia, who does just about 10 million, 11 million barrels in 2013, are currently keeping it around 10.3 million barrels right now. And that's even perhaps two-thirds of their permitted increment. So they do about 17 million barrels up just a day, which is a bit lower than the Kingdom's target of about 100,000 barrels a day. And we've seen that in the past 5 years, this is even perhaps the lowest they have even come in the last few months. So again, the key producers are struggling, to be honest, to keep their productions within the OPEC quota for reasons purely driven by the economic reality that it faces as a country. Most of these countries live out of the proceeds of oil. So of course, looking at the Nigerian space, where we have untold disruptions, vandalism of pipelines and things like that. That also comes with its own promise, because right now we're hovering around 1.7, 1.8, even with condensate production. So of course, when that happens, again, looking internally, the country often have a benchmark of oil prices in their budget. So all of these are issues that before the country in their face. So keeping the productions high enough will be their goal, and of course, keeping within allowable limits within the plans from OPEC is also some concern. So this has to be tempered a bit deliberately to ensure that most of the oil-producing countries would stay within their targets and also sustain the economy from the oil production.
But do you think OPEC and OPEC Plus, with the other allies not in the group, should actually increase its output? There are the demand concerns around global growth and how that's been stagnating, high inflation. Then when you add the lockdowns in Shanghai and Beijing, that demand that would have also assisted the global market is not there. Should OPEC Plus increase production quotas?
Well, in my impression, I don't think so. That would be, that would be a bit unexpected. Going by the issues around the industry right now, as we see, because currently countries are even struggling to keep up with that. With their quota. The news is all littered with stories around struggling nations like Nigeria trying to keep up with their OPEC targets, and even the big kingpins, Saudi Aramco, trying to keep up with their targets. So, looking at the historical numbers and their performances so far, one would not expect them to increase that just away from what we have right now.
So finally, Desmond, before I let you go, with the latest proposal in terms of a possible energy embargo on Russia, what should African countries prepare for, particularly economies, particularly Africans? Now, we already know we're seeing high fuel prices, high food prices as well. Countries like Egypt and Kenya are having to look for alternatives to supply wheat and other staple cereals. But when we get into all of this, vis-a-vis the opportunities African countries like Nigeria and Libya also have, what should we be prepared for in the coming weeks?
Okay, right. Clearly, Africa needs to up their games. I think the news has been, overflowed in various times in the media. Africa needs to boost their.
And unfortunately, just as we're looking to wrapping up the conversation, having some technical network connection issues there. But my guest today, Desmond Aboifo, he is an energy expert and a director at Decitone Energy. Conversation looking at the stagnation of the global economy and how things are coming together. I think Desmond is quickly back. If I can get him to wrap up his thoughts on this last part. Desmond, just very quickly as we wrap things up.
Right, thank you. My point was very clear. I was trying to allude to the fact that we need to increase our capacity for production. We need to also look within the context of how we can be able to sustain our productions and also enhance the economy and diversify the economy, basically. And we've seen that the impact of new renewables and sustainable energies have come to play. And so we are also looking to ensure that that stays for a longer period of time, while we also look to pushing the effect of the oil and gas industry's problems.
All right, Desmond, as always, thank you so much. I'll see you again sometime soon.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Have a nice day.
You too. And of course, there's also the conversation around the geopolitics of what is happening as well. African nations traditionally are neutral when it comes to issues involving NATO countries and things like that. But there has been a push for African countries to take sides. When you see situations like Hungary and Slovakia, I beg your pardon, deciding to step back and possibly receiving exemptions from the EU when it comes to the oil and gas embargo on Russia, why can't African nations also be getting an exemption in their dealings with Russia, particularly if it affects their economies and their citizens? You're watching Business Edge. When we come back, it's NC4 to watch. And so a few stories we're keeping our eyes on. We start in West Africa, where the Nigerian Communications Commission has said 5G services are expected to be rolled out in the nation from August 24th, 2022. The NCC disclosed this after it confirmed the issuance of the final letters for the award of the 5th generation spectrum licenses to MTN and Mafab Communications, who were winners of the 3.5 gigahertz spectrum auction conducted in December 2021. On the other side of the continent, Kenya Electricity Generating Company has announced plans to add 400 megawatts of geothermal power to the national grid in the next 5 years. The company says the outputs would completely phase out thermal power. Under the project, KenGen will rehabilitate some of its geothermal power plants and upgrade others as it continues with exploration around Okara and Eburu. The Central African Republic's adoption of Bitcoin as legal tender presents a series of challenges for the country and the region, according to the International Monetary Fund. The lender said that IMF staff are assisting the regional and Central African Republic's authorities in addressing the concerns posed by the new law. And finally, inflation in South Africa is set to rise to 8% this year, overshooting the central bank's target amid the global impact of the Ukraine conflict and rising U.S. interest rates. The forecast by credit rating agency Moody's shows that inflation was set to be higher than the South African Reserve Bank's 3 to 6% target range this year, before falling in 2023 and 2024. The central bank is likely to continue to tighten monetary policy after it raised interest rates in March. And that's today's show. You know what to do. Follow us on social media, download our mobile app, and of course, watch us on the platforms. We are available. This is Business Edge, where we focus on African finance, business, and the economy, because New Central puts Africa first. I'm Tolu Lokwe. Adilere Balogun. Have a fantastic day.